The Bernabéu woke up in a heavy silence, a silence that never bode well for Real Madrid. The night before, the club had suffered yet another home defeat, this time against Manchester City, 2-1. But it was more than just a loss. It was an open wound that no one seemed willing to hide. Yes, the score hurts, but there's something worse, something that burns from within. Madrid hadn't won at the Bernabéu since November 1st. 3 whole months, 3 months of frustration, doubts, and dark shadows. When the referee blew the final whistle, it wasn't just sighs that were heard. It was a murmur more painful than any defeat. Whispers against the coach, against Savi Alonso himself. At 11:11 p.m., as the players slunk down the tunnel, the phones of club officials, journalists, and agents were already buzzing, because the question no one dared to ask publicly was finally emerging. Has Savi lost control of the locker room? The signs had been there for a while. Tense glances between teammates, shouts during halftime, a player leaving the field without greeting anyone, another arguing with an assistant, and a third saying a phrase that now echoes throughout the club. This way, we're going nowhere. The locker room atmosphere was a ticking time bomb. Closed doors, long faces, an unnatural silence, a silence that smelled of a fracture. At midnight, a staff member summed it up with a devastating phrase: "We're worse off than people think." And the rumors exploded less than an hour later. What had started as a whisper had become a roar. Real Madrid had triggered an internal debate about Savi Alonso's future. And the most shocking part? The names being mentioned weren't minor bets or improvisations. They were 2 giants, 2 legends, 2 coaches who could change everything. Zinedine Zidane and Jurgen Klopp. One knows the club better than anyone. The other is the most coveted coach in the world. According to internal leaks, both were watching the situation closely. Madrid fans were anxious. The squad was divided, and Florentino was silent. A silence that always means something is brewing. And this is precisely when everything begins to change. At 9:02 a.m., Valdebebas was no longer what it normally was. No laughter, no jokes, no music coming from the locker room, only a heavy, almost uncomfortable silence. The defeat against City had left a fracture, a visible wound that some no longer tried to hide. At 9:05 a.m., Savi Alonso arrived at the parking lot. He didn't lift his head, walking straight to his office. No greeting, no word, just a serious gesture, sunk, aware that he was facing the toughest moment since arriving at the club. But things intensified a few minutes later. At 9:10, a club executive received an unexpected call. "We have a problem in the locker room. The leaders are not united." A direct, blunt statement, the first sign that the internal situation was worse than publicly reported. It wasn't just about losing matches, it was about how they were lost. A toxic environment, broken relationships, players no longer on the same wavelength. The rumor was spreading. Savi had lost part of the locker room. At 9:20, as some players arrived for training, their looks said it all. Separate groups, short conversations, no laughter, no enthusiastic greetings. One staff member described it like this: "It feels like they've played 3 losses instead of 1. At 9:27, a staff member overheard a comment that was already circulating throughout the club. "We cannot continue like this. Someone up top needs to make a decision." And everyone knew that someone was Florentino Pérez. But the real bombshell came at 9:31 a.m. A reliable European journalist tweeted a line that shook Madrid fans. "Real Madrid is exploring alternatives for Savi Alonso. Zidane and Klopp are paying close attention." The message triggered an earthquake inside and outside the club. Zidane's name always carries weight, and Klopp is the dream coach for half of Europe. At 9:33, a senior player asked out loud, "Klopp? Really? Would he come?" Another replied he wanted to rest this year, but for Madrid, he would listen. Internal tensions mixed with something even more dangerous, the hope of a change. At 9:36, another conversation erupted. A young player said, "If this keeps up, we won't reach May." A senior critic added, "He doesn't inspire us anymore." When the coach entered the locker room, everyone went silent. Savi felt it. The defeat against City wasn't just a lost match, it was a turning point. Meanwhile, in Florentino's office, an emergency meeting was taking shape. The president declared, "We must act. The team cannot sink." One executive asked the decisive question, "Should we call Zidane?" The silence that followed was more revealing than any answer. At 9:41, as the locker room tried to hide tensions that could no longer be concealed, an explosive meeting was forming in the Bernabeu's executive floor. Florentino arrived, stern, with a phrase that froze the directors. "I want updated reports on Zidane and Klopp." That day, debate became action. At 9:44, the CEO presented a sealed red folder, Zidane Project 3.0. Inside, everything was detailed. Contract conditions, sports plan, key players to recover or sign, and a crucial note. Zidane would only return if he felt the squad wanted him. Florentino frowned. The locker room had never been more divided. At 9:48, another, thicker folder appeared. Jurgen Klopp report. The document stated that after leaving Liverpool, the German coach had been reflecting, resting, and would be open to listening to Real Madrid. He wanted an emotional, ambitious project in a club where he could build and demand hunger. Florentino raised the question, is there hunger in this locker room? Because right now, it doesn't seem like it. At 9:51, an executive close to the team added, "Mr. President, several players believe Savi is not managing internal pressure." Another was more direct. "The bad streak at the Bernabéu has destroyed his authority." Florentino remained thoughtful, silent. The silence spoke louder than any defense. Down in Valdebebas, the atmosphere was breaking completely. By 9:54, two groups were visible. Group A, supporting Savi, wanting stability and time. Group B, demanding change, frustrated by poor results, believing Zidane would impose immediate order or Klopp would revolutionize the squad. Discussions grew more heated. A senior player said, "If Savi doesn't win the next match, it's over." Another added, "It's already over. We just wait for Florentino's announcement." At 9:57 a.m., Savi Alonso left his office, phone in hand. He had just read a headline that hit him like a brick. Real Madrid was already analyzing options to replace him. Zidane and Klopp were favorites. He stood frozen, staring at the screen, blinking slowly, absorbing the reality. "So this is it," he whispered. By 10:02, one of his assistants approached. "Sir, they've leaked the upstairs meeting." Savi closed his eyes for a moment. "So everyone knows they're talking about Zidane and Klopp?" The assistant nodded silently. "Yes, it's circulating through the locker room." Savi didn't need to speak. His eyes said it all. He knew exactly what that meant. At 10:05, someone, no one knew who, sent a message to the internal group that ignited a firestorm. If Klopp comes, several players have already said they'll stay. If Savi remains, they won't. The chat exploded. One player demanded, "Who said that? Say it to my face." Another responded, "Time's up. We can't protect names anymore. This is broken." Meanwhile, upstairs, Florentino closed the Klopp folder and said firmly, "I need a clear decision by the weekend." And he added the most powerful statement of the day, "We cannot continue losing at the Bernabeu, no matter the cost." By 10:10, Valdebebas was no longer tense. It was unbearable. Every gesture, every glance, every sigh was a silent declaration of war. The city defeat had triggered it, but what was happening now went far beyond football. Savi Alonso, phone still in hand, walked toward the locker room with a determination unseen since his arrival at the club. Too many headlines, too many messages, too many rumors. And he realized something crucial. His future no longer depended solely on him. At 10:13, he pushed open the locker room door. The players, divided into two obvious groups, went silent. Nobody moved. Savi walked slowly to the center and spoke the words that froze blood in the veins of more than one player. "I know what's happening upstairs." Absolute silence. "I know what is being said in the press. I know who wants me to stay." Another step forward. "And I also know who wants me gone." Some looked down, others crossed their arms. One from the critical core held a defiant gaze. "Yesterday, after losing to City, I didn't see a team," Savi continued. "I saw a broken group, full of blame, with no soul. That depends on you." At 10:16, one of the captains stepped forward, trying to calm things down. "Mister, we're going through a tough time, but we can fix it." Before he could finish, a player from the critical group interrupted. "Fix what?" "We haven't won at home in 3 months. The Bernabeu is booing us. This isn't working." Glances clashed like knives. Savi took a deep breath. "So that's it. You prefer changing the coach rather than changing yourselves." A young player stood up. "Sir, some feel they no longer connect with your way of working." The remark landed like a missile. Then a senior leader rose, furious. "What do you mean, don't connect? The problem isn't the mister. The problem is players who have relaxed, who give up, who only point fingers when things go wrong. The argument became explosive, a shout from the back. If you want me to say it, fine. There are people here who don't believe in Savi anymore, period. Another jumped. Say it by name, coward. Savi had to intervene. Enough. The locker room froze. He pointed at the badge on his chest. What is this? A locker room or a market of betrayals? Do you really think Zidane or Klopp will come to fix a group that cannot even speak respectfully to each other? The comment hurt, and it was true. At 10:22, an executive entered sweating, phone in hand. Savi, you need to see this. It was a message from Zidane's team. Short. Devastating. The coach is willing to listen to Real Madrid if a decision is made soon. Savi closed his eyes. He knew what it meant. Zidane never moves without a serious reason. Players saw his reaction and froze. At 10:25, another message arrived, this time from Klopp's team. Calm, patient, attentive. The executive looked at Savi. They're moving, for real. The entire locker room swallowed hard. By 10:28, a true leader spoke gravely. Coach, if you tell us to fight with you, we will. But if you feel they no longer listen to you, we understand. Savi looked each of them in the eye and said words that stopped the room cold. I will not cling to this position. If the club decides another must come, I will accept it. But until that day, I will fight for this team, even if some of you have already turned your back on me. The phrase hit like a hammer. After a long silence, a player from the critical group stood up. Florentino has to decide. We cannot continue like this. Either Savi or the locker room. That statement was too direct, too definitive. Silence followed. Savi, too, said nothing. At 10:31, the message reached the club's top management. A locker room leader demanded immediate change. At 10:36, the news thundered in the presidential office. A leader in the locker room wants an immediate change. Savi or the group. The executive delivering the message was trembling. Florentino looked up slowly, closed the reports on Zidane and Klopp, and said simply, the situation is now unsustainable. When a single player protests, the club listens. But when a true leader tells the president that the locker room cannot bear it anymore, everything changes. At 10:40, Florentino asked to be left alone for a few minutes. He stared at the Bernabéu from his window, recalling defeats, victories, cycle changes, and knew he had to make a difficult decision. But this one touched something deeper. 3 months without winning at home, criticism, doubts, disputes. The squad, instead of uniting, was fracturing. Then came the decisive message, Zidane's team signaling readiness. Florentino placed his phone on the desk. No smile, no hesitation. This was not coincidental nor opportunistic. Zidane was speaking without speaking. At 10:45, another executive came urgently. President, Klopp is also aware. He's ready to listen if the process begins. Florentino looked at him. Both were ready. Both coaches, the most wanted in the world, available, awaiting Real Madrid's move. Upstairs, a decision was looming. Downstairs, the locker room felt like a bomb. At 10:48, Savi Alonso sat alone in his office, staring at the badge on the wall, his notebook, failed tactics, phone filled with messages, rumors, opinions. He took a deep breath, stood slowly, walked to the door, and found the captain waiting. Respect. Respect, yes, but also the pain of knowing something was breaking. Mister, what are you going to do? Savi took a few seconds. I will do what any Madridista would. I will fight until the last minute, but I know this club needs bold decisions. The captain lowered his head. Whatever happens, thank you for everything. Savi placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm not finished yet. At 10:52, the locker room assembled again. Savi entered. No talk of tactics, effort, or mistakes. Only one statement. If this is my last journey with you, I want to walk it standing tall. Those willing to fight with me, do so. Those not, step aside. Nobody moved. The silence was overwhelming. Respect, uncertainty, fear. At 10:55, Florentino received the day's final report. The locker room wasn't responding. The coach was weakened. The fans were tense. The candidates ready. He closed his eyes for a second and said, tonight we make the decision. Savi Alonso's future, Zidane's possible return, Klopp's pending call, everything rested in the hands of one man, unshakable, who loves this badge as much as any player.